never grow a 2-pound heirloom tomato or a 200-pound giant pumpkin in our garden. The houses, garages, fences, and trees that surround the garden won't allow it. Though we're fortunate to have a few small areas that get 6 or 7 hours of direct sun this time of year, much of the garden gets 4 hours or less. Fortunately, we haven't been discouraged by this challenge, but have instead made the best of the situation, and have even discovered shade-tolerant crops that we might not have otherwise known about. So today I thought I'd talk about the challenges we faced growing in a shady garden, and how we've responded to those challenges. When we first started gardening in the early 90s, there was just a small strip of the yard that got enough sun to grow vegetables, and that's where we built our first raised bed. The rest of the yard was heavily shaded by over a dozen weed trees that the prior owner had let grow up along the fence line. When we decided to expand the garden, it was clear that we'd first have to remove all of the trees. After removing the trees, I wish I had thought to spend some time observing how the sun falls on the garden over the course of the day at different times of the year. This would have helped me find the best spots for sun-living crops like tomatoes and peppers, while reserving the more shady spots for lettuce, spinach, and other shade-tolerant crops. Instead, I learned from trial and error, and it only occurred to me a few years ago that I should do a solar assessment. This sounds more complicated than it really was. All I did was pick a day near the beginning of each season and take notes on how the sun fell on the garden. I recorded the number of hours of direct sun in the different areas of the yard, and noted what obstacles were creating shade given the angle of the sun in the sky and the presence or absence of leaves on deciduous trees. This not only gave me a better idea of where to plant sun-loving and shade-tolerant crops, it also showed me the best locations to grow during the different seasons. I mentioned earlier that we'll never grow a 2-pound heirloom tomato, but we've had great results with cherry tomatoes, especially Gardener's Delight cherry tomatoes, which not only ripen earlier, but also give us greater yields than larger varieties. The same is true for peppers. We get excellent yields from smaller peppers like jalapenos, but not from bell peppers, which don't always ripen before the first frost. Of course, even with the smaller tomato and pepper varieties, we still locate them in areas of the garden that get the most sun, which is about 6 hours in our case. And we usually grow our peppers in black pots on our concrete front steps. Not only is this location sunnier than most of the backyard, but the black pots and concrete help to retain heat, which enables us to get the peppers outside a little earlier in the spring. We also plant our potatoes, beans, cucumbers, and squash in areas of the yard that get at least 5 to 6 hours of sun. In the more shady areas of the yard, we grow a lot of greens like lettuce, spinach, collards, kale, mustard greens, and Swiss chard. Even with the greens though, you can see a definite difference depending on how much sun they get. For example, here's a Georgia collard green in an area of the garden that gets just a couple hours of sun per day. And here's one in an area that gets about 6 hours. That said, the small collards in the shade are still worth having. The leaves don't get very large, but they stay tender and are great for salads. In addition to these annuals, we've been focusing on growing more shade-tolerant perennials. Last year we planted 2 honeyberry plants, which are doing very well. This year we've planted Good King Henry, French sorrel, sea kale, rhubarb, and pawpaw trees, which all do well in dappled or partial shade. This is just scratching the surface of what we're growing, so I'll provide a link to a document of crops that we are growing and the approximate amount of sun they get. The hours of sun won't necessarily be the optimal or recommended amount, but reflect the best we can do in our garden. Though we'd love to have a couple more hours of sun to work with in our garden, there are some advantages to growing in partial shade. Probably the biggest is that we don't have to water as much. More hours of direct sun would result in greater evaporation, requiring more frequent watering. Another advantage is that spinach, lettuce, and other leafy greens are slower to bolt when grown in partial shade. Finally, we eat a lot more healthy greens that we might not otherwise eat, and leafy greens are just about the healthiest food out there. So though we'd love to grow a 2-pound heirloom tomato or a 200-pound giant pumpkin, we're thankful for the shady garden we have and all the healthy food it provides. Well, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. And until next time, remember, you can change the world one yard at a time.